Good afternoon, everybody. Let's get this session started. Welcome at Building Bridges. My name is Patrick Schmucki. I'm the co-lead of the Financial Service Climate and Sustainability team at KPMG, and I'm your host today. Our session is called Greening Real Estate Portfolios. Where do we start? So let's have a first look at the numbers. So in Switzerland, the real estate stock consumes or emits 25% of total CO2 emissions, and it is responsible for about 40% of energy consumption. Now, since the last public election, we know from the Federal Act on Climate Protection, Innovation and Strengthening of Energy Security that where these numbers are supposed to go in the future. So the law requires an 82% reduction of emissions by 2040, and indeed 100% reduction by 2050 compared to the 1990 baseline. So current estimates say that approximately 1 million buildings need to be energetically refurbished to meet these climate goals. That is approximately a renovation rate of 3% PA. Looking at the numbers where we are, right now it's about 1%. So once again, at Building Bridges, we need to establish we're lagging behind our goals. So the question is, what needs to be done? Let's have a look at the agenda to discuss what needs to be done. If you'd be so kind to, or let's do that first. I'll just introduce my panelists. To my left is Alexandros Grazias. He's the head of sustainable real estate investments at Bank Safra Sarasin. Then sitting to his left, we have Eric Jondot. He's professor of finance at the University of Lausanne and Swiss Finance Institute, and also co-director of the Center for Risk Management Lausanne. To his left, we have Adrian Schatzmann. He's the CEO of the Asset Management Association of Switzerland. And then to the very left, we have Olivier Seu. He is the head of real estate at Mirabeau. And not sitting up here, but you'll meet him in just a second, is Alexandre Pauli. He's a scientific collaborator at the Enterprise for Society. So we just finished the introduction, and after that, after some engagement with you, we will start with the academic keynotes by Eric and Alexandre, followed by some brief keynotes by Adrian, Alexandros, and Olivier, before we will then head into the panel discussion. And at the end, you can expect to ask your questions to the panel. So be prepared. But to get you all warmed up, let's do some ever so popular Slido. Please take out your phones. We're really interested in your opinion. So let's get started with the first question. So starting with an estimation, global real estate assets amount to over 500 trillion US dollars. Among these real assets, do you know approximately how much real estate assets account for? So is it 2/3, 1/3, or is it a half? Let's see what the correct answer was. Oh, we're going through all the questions, fine. So that's going to be an interesting one. What kind of regulation to boost the decarbonization of the real estate sector would you support? Several answers possible. Tax incentives or subsidies, banning of heating systems, change in rent law, or introduction of building standards. That's really interesting. We'll definitely get back to that. So then maybe for the last question. So who in the real estate ecosystem should primarily drive decarbonization in the real estate sector in Switzerland? So this time only one answer possible. You gotta make up your mind. I sense there are not many people working for the government in the room. But we'll definitely get back to that as well. Thank you very much. So now that you're all warmed up, I'm really pleased to introduce to you for today's first speaker, which is Eric Chandeau. Please, can I ask you to walk up to the speaker and
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. The question for this panel is to talk about where do we start. So I'm going to start by where did we start and where we go. So what I would like to present briefly is the kind of measure we use for evaluating or assessing the ESG practices in the real estate sector, and in particular in the among investment vehicles. And where we started was to use a survey of real estate vehicles. Okay, so funds, foundations, companies. And we did it for 2 years, so asking quite a lot of questions to all of the investment vehicles that we could find and contact. And we wanted to cover all dimensions of ESG practices. There were two main aspects in this survey. First, it allowed you to have an access to non-public information, which is pretty cool. We could ask questions that are not public. And to some extent, one consequence was that given that this is the answer from the vehicle itself, there is some control on how the information is provided, and there could be some, let's say, greenwashing, maybe in some cases. The main consequence, and that's the reason why we did change, is that this information was partly non-public, and the scores could not be disseminated to the public because it was confidential. So that was the motive for giving us an access to the information. It had to remain confidential. So of course, this is good to have access to a lot of information. That's a bit painful not to be allowed to provide this information to the public. So we switched to something that is a bit different, and the logic is just doing the other way around. And the logic is to use only public information, asking the minimum we can to real estate investment vehicles. So we're going to use public level data only, and to the one side, and on the other side we're going to use information from the investment vehicles, but that is public. Okay, so typically we're going to use information from the annual report, from the sustainability report, the list of buildings, this kind of information that is public. So the benefit of this is public data, so we can make the scores that we're going to build based on this information. We can make the scores public, so it's going to be transparent, the methodology will be known, it's going to be public, and it's going to be free of charge. So the focus is going to be, I mean, as you can see in the picture, the focus is going to be made on the investor instead of the funds. The first version of these public scores is going to be available by the end of the year. So briefly, just to give you a summary of the kind of information we're going to use and produce, part of the scores is going to be based on quantitative indicators, so essentially using building level information. So it's going to be a bottom-up approach. We start with a list of buildings of the held by funds, and we reconstruct, the indicators at the fund level. We're going to use information from the buildings that could be, physical. What is the surface of the building? How many levels in the building? Who lives in the building? And one advantage of this approach is it allows us to use the same methodology for all funds. When it's needed, we're going to use some sophisticated information technologies to reconstruct data that could be missing. And one important thing that I want to emphasize is going to be done in collaboration with Canto, who is helping us to collect and manage the information at the building level. So the scores are going to be produced by our centers, the CRML, that is going to be built on the information from Canto. The second part of the analysis is going to be more like textual information, looking at the annual report, the sustainability reports from the fund, and try to identify what is the strategy from the sustainability point of view. So how is it managed? What is the communication of the fund regarding ESG criteria? So maybe to some extent it's going to be a way also to identify if there is some kind of greenwashing, if you compare what is said and what is done. But that's, the future will tell us. So to finish, I just would like to show you a few pictures of the kind of results that we are going to produce. For the moment, it's just aggregate. We don't give names. We still work a bit on clarifying some aspects. But here you have a visualization of what's the difference between the scores based on the survey, so when we were asking to all funds, what are you doing, and what we obtained from the analysis of annual reports, sustainability reports, and so on. If you look at the correlation between the two rankings, it's pretty high. So the correlation is approximately 80%. So which means that essentially we can extract similar information from the annual report compared to what we were asking directly to the funds. Okay, the consequence of asking is that it remains confidential. If it's from the annual report, this is fine. The second thing is a comparison between the textual analysis that we do and the quantitative numbers that we find from the bottom-up approach, starting with the buildings. And you can see that there is quite a huge heterogeneity between the two types of scores. So you may say, okay, so it's probably because what we do is completely different on the two sides. I think it's probably the main reason is a question of communication from the funds, and I just identify two areas where we can think about what it really means. So the one at the top are funds who are doing very well at the communication level and pretty badly at the building level. Okay, so should we interpret this as greenwashing or not? I don't know. For the moment, I don't want to say to be that specific, but I think this is something to think about. And the other side here is just saying, what about the funds that do very well, but they lack communication skills maybe? in terms of what they do. So I think that's an interesting part. To finish, I'm just done. One thing in terms of preview of the results, and I was pretty sad to realize this, but the environmental scores that we find at the building level are on average pretty low in Romandie compared to the other side of the Sarine. So I think it's pretty clear from the data that we have at the building level, and it also means that the cost of retrofitting buildings is going to be pretty high in our region. The timeline, so at the end of the year, the scores will be public, and now we are building on designing an index of funds re-rating according to the ESG scores. And finally, next year we're going to produce some scores based on climate risk, so including transition risk and physical risk. So I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eric. Please take a seat. And can I ask Alexandre to take the stage, please? Thank you.
Oops. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the Green Value project. First, I would like to give you a bit of context. This project was initiated by companies in the real estate sector, and now it is run by Enterprise for Society, an academic institution. And the main objective of the Green Value project is to develop a methodology to determine and calculate the green value in buildings. So what is the green value? As you know, the building stock must be renovated. And this transition, it brings a lot of risk for the real estate investors. And as a result, what we observe is that the energy performance is now a key factor in investment decisions. And studies have shown that there is a brown discount in the resale value for buildings that have poor performance in terms of energy. So the main question we try to address in this project is, if I'm a building owner and I plan to renovate my building, how can I value this investment? So here I am, I'm the investor, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna renovate my building. The first thing I'm gonna look at as an investor is what is the direct impact on cash flow. It does not come as a surprise that if you renovate your building, it's a large investment, so your capital expenditure will increase by a lot. So what do I get in return? The first part, depending where your building is, in which canton, you can increase your rent to compensate. Also, you can assume, okay, my operational expenses will decrease because my building is renovated and I have new elements in my building. So if you stop here, you might conclude, okay, maybe this investment is not very profitable. But the thing is, that's only half of the story, because by renovating your building, you mitigate a lot of future risk. And I think it's a lot of discussion because this market is in the middle of a lot of mutation. We know there will be new regulation in the future, and also there are a lot of uncertainties, for example, regarding the price of construction. So if I renovate today, I protect myself against those risks. And I think the big question in the valuation method is how to integrate all those risks. So I have only a 5-minute presentation, so I will just try to give you the idea how we do it. First, we start, if you use standard discounted cash flow method, it typically uses a deterministic framework, which means the growth rate and the other variables are non-fixed. So where is the risk? All the risk is in the discount rate. So what does it imply in practice? The expert doing the evaluation has to calibrate or to come up with a premium for the energy performance, or more for the energy inefficiency of the building, because you want to protect for the risk. And the solution we try to come up with is say, okay, let's switch to a stochastic framework and use scenario for regulation. So this allows us to directly model the sources of risk. For example, the price of construction we can apply econometric models, and using data, we can then run simulation and assess how the project reacts to this risk. So really the goal of the project is to give a tool for valuation where you can decompose the risk into all the sources of risk relating to energy performance. So that's already it for me. I hope you got the main idea of the project. And if you're more interested, you can follow us on this website. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So those were our academic keynotes, and we will now move to the three presentations of our industry representatives, starting with Adrian from Amas.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me here. I represent the Asset Management Association of Switzerland, and last year we have published environmental key indicators for real estate funds, and I'll give you a brief update on this. So what is it we talk about? We talk about key indicators for real estate investment funds that are based here in Switzerland. We talk about a volume of roughly 250 billion here in Switzerland. I don't go in all details. You can download the detailed information easily from our website. But the most important ratio or indicator that where we typically start with is the coverage ratio. How much of a real estate portfolio is actually covered? What is the area where we measure, for example, energy consumption? And around this coverage ratio, we have 5 other key indicators. The energy mix, and obviously not every building can provide, as of today, the same level of granularity, but what we must see is what is the ratio between fossil energy and non-fossil energy. Energy consumption, as such, very important, but it's an absolute number. If you want to compare, if you want to understand whether a real estate fund is energy efficient, you obviously need to compare it with the measured area in square meters. Then you get a much more comparable number. And very much along the same lines, we proceed with greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, we measure them on an absolute term, on an absolute level, but then we need to put it into perspective with the covered area to make it comparable from one product to the other. After the what, briefly why. Why did we do that? Why did we launch and publish these key indicators? First and foremost, we responded to investor needs, and to be a bit more precise, predominantly institutional investor needs. Those investors, they not only ask for transparency, but probably much more important, they ask for comparability. Because there's no use if you have all the data for product A, for an investment fund A, but you can't compare it to another product. So the comparability, that's been the driving force behind these key indicators. And obviously, as an industry, I said it before, real estate investments extremely important for the asset management industry. Almost 10% of the assets managed here in Switzerland are in real estate. And we heard it before also from you, Patrick, that the real estate sector is also very important if we want to address the carbon dioxide problem. So the combination, an important sector, investment sector, and the potential for impact, that brought us to the conclusion that we should act here. We're obviously very fortunate at Amas to have access to a lot of highly specialized members. There was enormous amount of know-how and expertise that we could draw on. A lot of our members contributed to this. And equally important was that we didn't want to do that alone. Again, comparability is the key thing. If every association has its own standards, There's nothing won for investors. This is why we reached out to other associations. You see it here. CAGAST, those who look after the investment foundations are used for pension funds. They have taken this over. ASIP, the Pension Fund Association, they make reference to exactly our standards. So this is what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to make sure that these standards are not used in isolation, but find acceptance across the industry. One important aspect, finally, these key indicators, they're not just recommendations. Those who are members at the Asset Management Association, in the Asset Management Association, for them it is mandatory. And we will see the first results by the end of 23 when the first reporting area ends. Very briefly, next steps. I mean, you do these key indicators and you all know it. This area, sustainability, that is such dynamic, new concepts arise. And we have also updated we have specified our paper from last year with a best practice perspective, in particular, further working on everything that helps us to make things more comparable. For example, by stabilizing a measurement concept, by referring to particular methodologies, by making sure if you compare an investment, a real estate investment fund this year with the indicators from last year, that this comparison is meaningful. We want to make sure that investors can take qualified investment decisions. With this, I leave it, and I think I hand over to, you need to help me here.
Correct.
Okay.
So, Alex, please. Thank you very much, Adrian.
1 minute. Point here. Can you help me with slides? Oh. Yes. So I'm Alex Garcias from Safra Sarrazin. As with Safra Sarrazin, we started with sustainable guidelines for real estate funds in 2009-2010, and some of the funds. Apologies. So in Safra Sarrazin, we started in 2009-2010 with sustainable guidelines for real estate funds, and as of 2019, we also have climate neutral goals. So I'm here to share with you our key, let's say, elements of how we're willing to go in that direction, what we're doing to green real estate portfolios. So four messages I would like to give to you. The first one is that there are different, let's say, aspects of greening a real estate. So you have to think that it might be sustainable, you might have an impact goal, you might want to go climate neutral by 2035, 2040, 50, so you have to decide how fast you want to do it and with what costs. The second aspect is that there was a question on this at the beginning. The main force in Europe in these regards is the regulator. It's the main force who is forcing all real estate investors to go towards green investments, and you should expect that latest by 2030 this is going to be also the case in Switzerland. The third point is that you can only green your portfolios by setting targets, KPIs, preferably audited, communicating this to your investors, and making sure that year by year you're reporting it and having a performance. So you have to be as serious as you are for your financial performance with these KPIs. And the last message is that the real estate industry is right now changing very fast, and this comes with many risks. So you have to make sure that you have a risk monitor on transition and physical risks. And with that, I start with the first one. I said you have different aspects of sustainability. So here you see number one is only let's say financial focus. Then two is possible this kind of disappears. And then you go on 3 and 4. This is the Article 8 and Article 9 according to European regulations. And the more you go towards impact, you will see the below, can I point here? Yeah. You will see the below market financial return. So you will see that the more you go toward impact, you might have to give back to your returns. And this is a question on your fiduciary GT. Are you willing to do that or not? Are you willing to give back on returns in order to go green? Yes or no? At Sapphire Sargent, we believe that you create premium, so we focus mainly on number 3 and 4. Now, what I point out about regulators, these are some examples from Europe, and please expect that the same will happen in Switzerland. So 10 years ago, all the regulations were for new buildings. You had a new building, you get tougher and tougher regulations. 5 years ago, they went to commercial, offices, etc. You cannot anymore rent your office if it's energy rating C, you cannot rent if it's energy rating D. During COVID, we started seeing that regulators in Europe, they went after residential, something that we never expected. So even the last example in Belgium, during the inflation crisis, they said if you have an apartment with energy rating below F, you're not allowed anymore to increase your rent. It was regarding the inflation, right? So you see this impact from the regulators coming and without even expecting it. And this is not only on new buildings, it is existing, and it's not only on commercial, it's also on residential. So keep in mind that this trend is here, and it's gonna be also in Switzerland by 2030, the latest. And on the right side, you see the decarbonization pathway that this for real estate, this on for office, according to CREM 2, that specific countries have to follow. And I believe that going towards 2030, that countries are going to start missing their targets. I think this is a common knowledge by now. We'll see regulations being stricter and stricter. So the trend is here, and you might decide to green your portfolio right now, or you might be forced to do it later on a discount. As said before, how do you do it? You can only do it by setting very specific targets, easy to understand, easy to monitor, easy to communicate to your property managers, and easy to audit, right? So you have to be very specific. This is an example of our methodology. This doesn't apply to all funds, but what we did here is we download the Sustainable Development Goals. We try to figure out which of the sub-goals, sub-categories are relevant to real estate, and then we try to put very specific criteria for each one, like LED lighting, right? So we have to increase our efficient lighting year by year on a portfolio level, or we have to implement water-saving systems, certifications such as BREEAM, LEED, Minergie, etc. So these are specific KPIs that we communicate to investors, and we show them year by year on the reporting. Carbon neutrality is the main target. This is our methodology of how we want to achieve it. I think, again, here you have to I think without auditing this data, without having a very transparent methodology, without communicating to your investors, you'll never go carbon neutral. In this regards, maybe also our experience, commercial is much easier. Residential is much harder to go carbon neutral, because in commercial, the moment an office is empty, you can go in, you can do your refurbishment, you can change everything. In residential, you have only an apartment level change of tenants, so it's much harder to create a strategy unless you want to take out all your tenants and start from scratch, which is kind of, from a fund manager's perspective or a foundation, you might not be willing to do that. And then the last point that I mentioned is the risk. So, like 10 years ago, everyone in real estate was saying, this is the slowest industry. You buy an office, you get 5%, 15 years later you sell it, you're good to go, right? And then we saw that this changed massively. Now, office is not, let's say, the most attractive. We see, as I saw before, the regulations coming. We see natural catastrophes coming. So this is not anymore a very slow industry. It's changing very fast and very rapidly. This is why you need to monitor, you need to have a risk monitor. So this is an example of our transition risk monitor. On the left side is we try to assess in our portfolios if, let's say, properties are positioned well for the future, and these are the criteria that we have: excessive energy, greenhouse gas emissions, reliance on fossil fuel, and the quality of the property. And on the right side is you kind of have to quantify it on a value at risk and a financial exposure, because otherwise, from a investment decision perspective, you never make a call unless you see a value at risk, unless you see the risk based on Swiss francs or euros. And this is what a simplified methodology based on our CO2 emissions. We believe, under the scenario that the carbon tax is going to come, pricing in carbon, and then discounting, we try to figure out our Wyatt risk. So this is what I would like to show to you. It's, as said, 4 key messages. The first one is that you have different aspects of green, and you have to decide how fast you want to be and what impact does this one have to your portfolio. Second, the regulator is the main force, and you better be prepared and you better position your portfolios right now before 2030. Third, that without specific KPIs, preferably audited in good quality, you'll never manage to go green. And finally, be aware of the risks that are coming with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And now the best for the end. Stage is yours, Olivier.
Good afternoon. My key message, clearly we have a very big market opportunity. Clearly we have to accelerate, and this graph shows how far we are from the targets. But my message is the current market conditions, especially in the commercial real estate sector, provide us a very, very big opportunity. So what are we doing, especially in France? We have launched a fund which is dedicated to financing the restructuring of obsolete assets, especially office buildings that become vacant and for which there are an increasing number of disposals. So the market opportunity is very clear. We should be in a position to buy obsolete assets with big discounts, to finance the restructurings, and to put these assets back to the market at the current energy efficiency standards. So among the reasons why it took so long to start all this, clearly there was the interest rates conditions. As long as the rates were declining, the value of the assets, and especially the commercial office buildings, was increasing, and there was no room for financing the restructuring. Now that the rates have increased, clearly there is room to finance the restructuring and to put the assets back to the market. We all have to work together to do this, the investors and also the local authorities, the governments. In France, the French authorities have adopted several laws over the past years, starting about 15 years ago, to make it easier and to provide more comfort for the developers, the risk takers, when it comes to buying assets very early in the restructuring process and deliver the returns. Today, it's still difficult to raise equity to take the normal risk that's related to restructurings. And the banks are still quite reluctant to provide typical debt financing. So financing the restructurings today needs equity. And unfortunately, as you can see, equity is, in this context, is quite scarce. And we all know that large institutional investors have to invest more than they do in the restructuring of obsolete assets. Of course, this kind of operation, buying obsolete assets and restructuring them, implies several kinds of risk. And basically, I would say there are 3 types of risk. The first is administrative, second is market, and the third is construction. Construction is clearly well managed and monitored by the largest market players, the developers, the builders. So I wouldn't rank this as number 1. Market risk is clearly an issue in the commercial real estate sector, but it's not in the housing sector, since the demand for new built homes is very strong. Now we come to administrative risk, as most restructuring projects need administrative approvals. In France, they have made significant moves to provide more comfort, to secure the approvals, and to make it possible to deliver a normal return profile, attractive profile in terms of return for these operations. Clearly, in other countries, they have to accelerate to provide also more comfort to deliver building permits in order to accelerate operations restructurings. On top of that, we all know we have to include other aspects in the restructurings, not only the environmental targets, but also social targets, especially when it comes to social mixity in housing. And my message is, based on our experience, that to get a project on track, we need to have the local authorities very early in the process. We need to discuss with them very early to ensure that the project that we launch is consistent with their targets and will be approved by the population. So again, we all need to work together, the investors, the local authorities, and the developers, to ensure that we accelerate, as we all need to, in terms of restructuring assets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Thank you to all the speakers this afternoon. We are now coming to the discussion. I think we started off with the topic about data and transparency, and I'd like to start there today as well. So Adrian Amos has published the guidelines on the environmental indicators roughly 2 years ago. Now you're following up with some further guidance. So from an investor perspective, are those KPIs now sufficient, or where is your thinking right now at Amos? Where is the journey going?
Well, this space, it will evolve. There's no doubt about this. But adding indicators is not our priority, and probably for 2 reasons. First, we have a robust framework in place, and most important is that we increase the coverage ratio. Well, there's no point in measuring more if the basis is not big. The second reason is probably more fundamental, and don't get me wrong, I'm a strong supporter of transparency and disclosure, but we must not forget what this is all about. We have a problem to solve, and the problem is climate change. And just by adding more and more criteria, by becoming more granular, we may become better at describing the problem, but we don't solve the problem.
Eric, the ESG ratings you developed are broader than climate, I understood. I think it's supposed to work by itself. So what was your rationale for kind of taking a broader perspective than just climate?
Well, I agree that carbon emissions and this decarbonization process is I mean, that's definitely the priority. There are some other dimensions that should be captured if we want to go along the lines of ESG criteria. For the E pillar, and we exactly go in that direction. I mean, for the moment, our indicators for measuring the environmental dimension of real estate funds is to go for, energy consumption and CO2 emissions. I have to say, I mean, we started with these 2 indicators because they are more or less available even at the building level. If we could. I wish we would be able to include more, probably, regarding water consumption, waste management, this kind of additional information that is still related to the E pillar, but not directly on energy issues. On our side, we're going to go in that direction, try to incorporate more and more indicators over time if we can. I mean, we want them to make sense, of course, but we try to improve this.
Can I give an example on this one?
Sure.
Because I think that having KPIs is only the beginning, right, of bringing a portfolio towards the green side. And I would like to give an example of what happens in Germany right now for one of our European strategies. The regulator is forcing us to apply the CREM tool. This is a benchmark. For each country, you have a carbon emissions intensity for each sector. So we're forced to, I mean, we have it already in our prospectus that at least 70% of our portfolio will comply with this benchmark. So this is an example of how regulator is forcing a fund to go towards carbon neutrality. It says that you have to have this, to follow the line of the benchmark, which is carbon neutral by 2050, right? And this is an example of not only a KPI, but a clear benchmark that is there. And this is already happening in some countries, and I think this is also, let's say, the solution. If you want to do it quite fast, you need to set up benchmarks, you need to have KPIs, you need to know your values, and you need at the end to set a benchmark, and you need to be forced on that benchmark. Mm-hmm.
So maybe picking up on that. So we understand it is the expectation of regulators and also investors. But so we have now these indicators. Like, what is the actual interest that you perceive from your clients in these KPIs? How big is the interest? What is the significance? And what is the purpose that they use this information for?
I think on the institutional side, the interest is starting being high. Obviously, let's say on a fund selection, the financial returns is still the biggest aspect, but we start seeing more and more investors asking about these KPIs. So we see the interest increasing. Having said that, again, coming back to the regulations, in Europe, we have to report these KPIs, right? You cannot anymore publish a financial report without including these KPIs. So you have to do it now, anyways. Yeah,
but are you getting actually questions or pushback on these numbers if you're not in line with the reduction path or anything like that?
Well, to be honest with you, for the time being, we are in line. But yes, we're getting questions on, especially for more sophisticated, from institutional clients, on how you report, why, if you have an audit or not, what's happening year after year, why you didn't perform a specific KPI. So we do get questions on that side too. Yeah. We do.
Yeah. We have
not as much as why what happens to your financial returns, right? Still, let's say on a meeting, 70% of the time is dedicated to the financial side, but you start seeing that right now, at least in our case, 30% is also on the sustainability side. So we see this thing, we see it increasing.
Yeah.
If I can briefly add here, I agree with everything you say. One challenge I see on top of it is, and it goes further than just this workshop, we in this industry, we have a language that is so technical. There are acronyms flying around, and eventually this disclosure reporting, everything, this is the purpose is to help our clients to take qualified investment decisions. And one area where I think we collectively need to improve is to make sure we use the right language.
Mm. Can you maybe elaborate on that? Like, what's your thinking there on? I think I fully agree with we need a more simple language. What is, what is your thinking? Since this is an old discussion in financial services about the right language that people understand.
Don't get me started. I mean, all this Anglicism we use, all these abbreviations that we use formulas without explaining what these formulas stand for. I mean, the list is endless.
Yeah. Eric, if you don't mind me asking, so I understand your ratings are meant for retail, to be used for retail investors. What was your thinking around this point about, you know, relevance and understandability for the users of this information?
So I would not say that it's necessarily for retail investors. I think it's more or less for, you know, fund of funds, right? So if you have a fund invest, or it could be for pension funds as well. They are investing in real estate funds on a regular basis. They are asked to provide some indicators on their own investment, and they have no clue about what they are, how well they do in investing in a given real estate fund, right? So it's not only for retail investor. It's for, I mean, in my view, it's probably more for institutional investors investing in these funds. That will be the target.
Yeah.
If I may, I would just add one comment on your previous question on the necessity of norms. I mean, until the last paper by Hamas, there was this ambiguity on how we should define scope 1 and 2 emissions at the fund level, and it was quite heterogeneous, to say the least, in terms of what funds are currently doing in measuring their emissions. So you have reporting going all directions without this norm. I mean, now my guess is that it's going to be harmonized across funds, and the comparability is going to be dramatically improved.
I just want to
Thanks for doing this.
I just want to touch about something that Adrian said at the beginning, and move away a bit from kind of the data discussion, which is, as you correctly said, you know, we are this, you know, with this focus on data, we are discussing what the magnitude of the problem really is, when actually we have a pretty good understanding what the magnitude really is, and it's really about doing. And all of you, you showed a really great presentation of what you're doing in France, exactly what we're talking about, which is taking those stranded assets, right, investing them and bringing them back onto the market. Can you give us a perspective on like how would that work in Switzerland?
Well, I don't know the Swiss market as well as I know the French market, clearly. But based upon the different discussions I had with my colleagues, for instance, I understand that the Swiss environment, when it comes to urban planning regulations, getting approvals, is maybe less ahead or less advanced than the French market. In the French market, we have had several laws over the past 15 years that have made it more and more easy to get a building permit. The time that it takes is becoming more and more certain. We're talking about months, in some cases 1 year, 1 year and a half. So this is the kind of process duration that makes it possible to invest and generate a reasonable, attractive return. Based on what I understand from the Swiss market, it takes so long to get approvals that you cannot get any return that's comparable to a bond return or a private equity return. It takes just too long. So my key point is, it seems like France is ahead regarding the regulation that relates to approvals. The possibility to raise claims or to file claims against permits has been narrowed, it's restricted. It's become very difficult to file a claim against a permit and to win. And clearly this is the kind of thing that every country should have in its set of law, just in order to provide comfort to those that run the projects.
Maybe Alex, your products follow a different strategy, more of a kind of buying and holding and kind of continuously improving the quality of the buildings. What are the practical challenges that you are facing with the implementation of your net zero strategy?
So practical challenges, I think on the commercial side, it's so, because you have to really, in each asset class, you have different challenges, right? I think what we expect, for example, on the European context is that there's not enough renewable energy, something that in let's say, electricity. So we do expect that, for example, electricity, renewable energy is going to increase, or when we invest in a district heating system, that the district heating would be based on renewable and not on gas heating, for example. This is also the case for Switzerland, that sometimes you go into district heating, but it's not anymore renewable. Mm-hmm. So we do expect, let's say, that the cantons or the cities, either in Switzerland or in Europe, they will do their part and they will increase their renewable quota. Mm-hmm. The second challenge, I think, is, as said, is mainly on the residential side, because you have rolling contracts on apartment by apartment, then how do you implement a strategy without emptying the building? I think this is kind of a hard issue. Whereas in the commercial side, the moment your tenant takes the break option and gets out of the building, you can get in and do your work. So this is also a challenge that we face on the residential side, and I think this is also for more fund managers a common challenge on the residential industry. Mm.
So you have, I mean, you're looking at horizons of like 20, 30 years in your portfolio to keep your assets, right? Which is like obviously will need kind of more to get to the targets. What do you think? What do you think is needed to kind of accelerate and kind of scale the approaches that Olivier described to a larger extent to gain momentum for the transition?
I think that the only way to accelerate is either the willingness of investors to invest mostly in funds that are sustainable, or the regulator to push towards this direction, right? I think these are the two main criteria that can accelerate this trend.
Yeah. Can I ask the panel? So obviously, before we asked about popular regulatory initiatives in the room, and the tax incentives scored really high. Can I, maybe Olivier or Alex, or anybody who would like to mention, what's your perspective on that?
I mean, I think it's positive, and I think this already exists. For example, in Geneva, you can do an energy study. This is mostly subsidized. You can change your heating system. You also get a bigger amount back from the canton. So I think this already exists, and it's very positive that it happens. And also in Europe, we see that more and more. So I think this is a positive issue, that you can invest, and you can expect that part of it would be either via tax or via subsidies that you will get back as an investor from investment point of view. Because sometimes we also face hard decisions in the case that you have an asset that after investing, the value is not as high anymore. So the investment is not capitalized, right? And this is kind of a hard decision. And in this case, normally we tend to sell the asset. So in an investment, let's say, committee, you wouldn't decide to make the investments as long as you don't have your return. So in this case, you would be forced as a fund manager to sell the asset. And this is where maybe tax incentives or a case like that would help you.
I quickly add here, I like the survey very much, irrespective of whether it's now tax subsidized or whatever. it directs the discussion to where it actually belongs. We spend a lot of time on discussing financial regulation, getting transparency standards. And again, don't get me wrong, we have, as an industry, we have an important role to play, but we don't solve the problem on our own. The problem needs to be solved in the real economy. And to take one of the answers I saw before, if fossil heating was forbidden in Switzerland, we probably all wouldn't be here.
Yeah, I would like just to add a comment regarding how is it possible to expand the strategy and to accelerate restructurings. And based on our 5-year experience at Mirabeau on this specific matter, it seems like we need to build large portfolios of assets, as clearly the risks that are related to restructurings, they are different from the risks that one takes when buying an asset and just collecting rents. And so you need, an investor needs to broaden the portfolio and to have dozens of assets in the portfolio to mitigate the risks and deliver the expected returns. So it's not just like a private equity fund where you would have 10 assets in a portfolio. That's not enough. One needs to have 30, 40, 50 assets with cautious assumptions when it comes to delays and costs, just to mitigate the risk profile.
Maybe a question, Olivier, on kind of the social impact of such policies. I mean, just I'm Swiss, and knowing Switzerland, we just love lawyers when it's when the neighbor's building something and so on, which is, I guess, part of the reason why it takes so long to get building permits in Switzerland. So, but obviously, if we make the argument, you know, that building should be made easier. In France, I mean, what have been the responses of the communities when there was resistance? What were your learnings in that way?
Yeah, well, it's the law again that sets quite a restrictive obligation regarding social housing in the dense areas, with a minimum share of social housing in these areas of 25% of the stock, the inventory of homes. And this law was adopted several years ago and didn't raise any big issue. I mean, this is something which is accepted. There are some municipalities, communities that do not comply with the target, and today they have to pay financial penalties until they reach the target. So this is quite authoritarian, but it works. And we all are convinced that this is a necessity, just in order to ensure, I would say, a balance in our societies.
Alex, KPMG recently did a survey, and we also asked participants whether all costs and investments of ESG measures are taken into account in the portfolio values. And the result was that 86% of the respondents are of the opinion that this is not or only partially the case. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think it's positive that, I mean, the real estate industry is aware that costs are coming and they're not, let's say, fully calculated yet, right? So, as I saw before, also more and more regulations are there. You don't know what's going to happen in 10 years, and it's true that it's not clear, let's say, the cost that you need in order to reposition all your properties. This is, in many cases, not yet fully calculated. And but I think this is kind of a positive aspect, that investors are aware that these costs are coming. And I think that as a fund manager, you have to be positioned in a way that you can quite quickly calculate this cost, right? You can quite quickly figure out how much. So when we, let's say, launched our climate pledge, we did a calculation for all our properties, and we did an assumption based on assumptions, of course, but we knew what it would take us to bring these properties in a climate neutral path. Obviously, the calculation now changed with inflation, with costs that increased, etc. But we did this calculation. We tried to figure out how much it would cost us. And to be honest with you, in case that it didn't pay out, we already said that 3 or 4 properties would need to be sold by 2030 in order to comply, because we think it doesn't make sense to put that many capital expenditures in these properties.
Yeah.
But I think it's very important to calculate this concept, to understand in terms of risk monitoring what is ahead of you, right? Mm.
If I can add one word on the projects that Alexandre Poli presented a few minutes ago on the green value. So what I find interesting is that 1 or 2 years ago, when we started to think about the project, the main question was, is there any green value? And people were thinking, it's very hard to give a value to renovating a building. Nobody wanted to go that way because the value is marginal. And now we just go completely the other way around, right? I mean, the question is, okay, so what if we cannot renovate our buildings? We're going to lose so much money because of the regulations that forces owners to renovate, losses in the value of buildings that are not renovated, and so on and so forth. So it just goes completely the other way. Mm. And I think it's quite frightening to see, how many buildings have to be renovated in a very short period.
Yeah. So you're mentioning the Brown discount. That was also mentioned in the presentation before. Maybe Olivier, you were going to say something on it. What is your observation with regard to the Brown discount? What are you seeing in France? And then maybe afterwards, Alex, what are you seeing in broader Europe and Switzerland with that regard?
Yes, 2 points. First, the point relates to the price at which we buy the obsolete assets, and more they take into account the entire cost of restructuring. So it's clearly something which is done. I mean, the developers with whom we partner, they perfectly know how much it costs to restructure an asset, to reposition it. And the price at which we accept to buy the asset, the obsolete asset, takes into account the total cost of restructuring. Second point relates to how do we manage to finance the restructurings. Clearly, in most cases, there's an increase in the constructibility. So typically on a specific location, there's a building of, let's say, 20,000 square meters. And in the restructuring process, we will gain a few thousand square meters built. And so this is made possible by the regulation. It increases density, and obviously it helps finance the restructuring.
We'll get to questions in just a second. So you can already prepare. I'll just going to give the word to Alex, and then your own.
Yes, look, regarding Brown discounts, I think it's really a question of market dynamic, meaning in offices right now, you will see a lot of Brown discounts, right? Because the demand is not there, there is an oversupply, at least in Europe. So you will see, due to environmental regulations, more, let's say, the evaluation of properties, right? Now, on the other hand, on residential real estate in Switzerland, even if they might not fully comply with regulations, it's going to be very hard to see Brown discounts. I mean, you will see your cash flow reducing, but it's going to be very. I don't see Brown discounts, for example, in the residential sector in Switzerland, because prices are so stable, and we see a very strong dynamic. So it has, in order to understand that the discounts, the Brown discounts and the premiums, you have to mix the sustainability with the market dynamics. Mm.
Well, thank you very much. We're moving now to questions. So maybe we start with you here in the front. Please state your name and your question.
Thank you. My name is Johanna Zuleta, and I do something new. I call myself a cross-pollinator. And this is bringing together intersectoral dialogue for collaborations, but with a dimensionality of arts and culture, which is not normally included. So policymakers, corporate world, and arts and culture. And I wondered, from the real estate perspective, are you incorporating that also in your social activities? Or do you have a different collaboration with other sectors as well? That's one thing. And I'm also curious to know, because I go to the Venice Biennale of Architecture, and it's a gathering of hundreds of projects that are all about architecture, real estate, sustainability, and how do we build from materials, from how we handle waste. Are you also aware of those places? Do you interact with it? It's just a personal, professional, personal question.
Yeah, I think it's a broader question. So, of course, in our case, we don't really deal with art or with elements like that in our investments, but we do deal with social aspects, even though I have to say we're mostly focused, let's say 90% of our focus is on the environmental side. What we're doing on the social side is mostly via certifications, making sure that the materials are correct. So we're trying to do for those who know, it's the most known certification, DGNB, LEED, BREEAM. So there are different certifications, environmental for properties, Minergie in Switzerland, and this is what we're trying to do to make sure that we have the proper quality in our properties. But I have to admit that the social aspect is very limited.
I can quickly add here, from an industry perspective, we have these discussions. I mean, ESG, the S, the social dimension, is actually very important. But for now, we have decided to focus on the E, because that's where we have the biggest impact. But I'm also open and honest here. The S is a bit tricky. It quickly gets very political. What is a social renting, for example? So that is another reason why we think we should stick with the E for the time being.
But if I may say, many of these projects, the thing that I see is not only anymore decoration, it's like there are solutions coming from those creatives too. So that's kind of like the open mindedness I want to just plant on you. It's not just decoration, they are also providing solutions and thinking out of the box, materials-wise, etc.
We have a question from the after you, but first, some gentleman over there. Please state your name and your question.
Yeah, hi. My name is Dag Messelt, and I work for Sustainax, a Swedish ESG research or risk research company. First of all, observations, as you said from Mirabeau here, it's quite interesting that there will be some opportunities for investing. But that also means that there is a number of current owners who actually go in for some hard losses in this area. And also I would be a little bit cautious, especially in this area, to make sometimes too simple quant-based also indicators for risk and so on. So but we can discuss that for sure. Now to the question. When addressing all building structures, can they, from that basis, really be upgraded to today's standards, what is expected, but also enough to hold it over time, so standards that will come? And do you foresee to tear it down and build new? And is not longer lifetime for existing low-performance assets sometimes actually better than to build new when life cycle analysis is taken into account? And with the regulatory requirements we now see that you had on the slide here in Germany and other countries, do the regulators actually take LCA into account when they come up with this, or do they only focus on greenhouse gas emissions? Thanks.
Other questions there? Anybody? Any takers?
Yeah, I can take some of the questions. So the life cycle study is very important, right? So, and this is kind of a good critique for the real estate industry. That we're mostly focusing on the operational CO2 emissions, meaning tell me your portfolio how much CO2 emissions it has right now. But if you say that you're going to tear it down and rebuilt it, then on a life cycle perspective, you always lose. You always have a higher CO2 intensity. So the only way to go forward is to refurbish and reposition buildings, right? Now, of course, the question is, does financial make sense, yes or no? So let's say this building right here, you could never make it a residential, right? You have no windows in here. So this building will always stay either a retail or a conference center like it is now. So you have to make sure that it makes sense also to reposition. But from a life cycle perspective, the answer is always, it's only renovating makes sense, right? That's what I'd like to add for this question. Now, the other questions, to be honest with you, I kind of missed a bit. So
yeah, me too. Anyway, we're short of time, so we'll just have one more question from the lady here in the middle, and then we'll have to close already. Please.
What an honor. So my name is Olga Buchi-Ginsburg, and I used to have my own real estate investment company in Berlin, and now I'm working for a single family office in Switzerland. And I do pro bono work for 42 hacks that want to decarbonize real estate. So I'm very excited to be here. I have many questions, but I know we don't have much time. But maybe to Alexandros regarding your slide number 4. So where you listed basically the potential of how we can improve our buildings basically to reach the 2030 and the 2050 goals. If the goal is to reduce CO2 emissions, where do you see the biggest levers within the building structure? Is it isolation? Like a very technical question from, it seems you have quite a lot of experience there.
So the first thing we're tending to do is reduce CO2 emissions without any cost. So the first thing we're doing is trying to find an electricity provider with renewable energies, go back to our tenants, explain to them that they have to switch into a renewable, go to our district heating provider, renegotiate the contract. So this is the first thing we do. We try really to, and in our experience, 50% reduction can be achieved with zero cost. It does take a lot of time, but you can achieve it. Now, on a second base is changing your heating system, meaning if it's gas or oil, you have to automatically switch it. This gives you another 30%. But of course, this costs a bit, right? So switching into heating pump or switching into district heating, and then it's quite technical. There are specific aspects. So in residential, sometimes you simply cannot do it. It doesn't work. In commercial, it mostly works. And this is kind of the risk of brown discount. Sometimes you just cannot change your heating system. It has to remain gas or oil, and this is kind of a problem, right? But so this would be the second step, going into your heating system. And then you go into the big costs, which you normally tend not to touch because it's really at least 10% of your total value, right? So let's say if your building costs 40 million, has a value of 40 million, you have to spend at least 4 million on it, which is kind of a 2.5 years of your rental income. So it's a massive investment on the building. And this is, of course, the facade, the windows, and the roof, where you can achieve, though, an upgrade of energy rating. You can expect two levels, right? So to summarize, we try to do 50% without any cost because we still have a dividend to achieve as a fund, and we really want to achieve this. On commercial side, the moment we have a break option, we can create more value, then we tend to go more deeper into the building.
Thank you.
So we're actually doing pretty good on time, so we might take one more. The gentleman here in front.
Hello, my name is Laurie Santi. I'm from Aliens Trading, a blockchain tech consulting firm. In the US, we are speaking about tokenization of assets, especially in the real estate world. I was quite agree with Adrian that was talking about not regulation, but how can we add value in the true world. What are your perspectives about tokenization in the real estate industry? Thank you.
It's a topic that we look at very carefully, not only for real estate, but obviously it's a good starting point. There, at top of my head, there are 3 points. First, you can tokenize real estate as long as you want, but you don't make it more liquid. So what would be the natural benefit for tokenizing a real estate? From an investment fund perspective, it is, the current status here in Switzerland. We don't have a law that allows us to invest in a tokenized fund that invests in a tokenized asset. Of course, you can invest in whatever is tokenized, but as long as the wrapper is still very traditional, you miss out a bit of the opportunity. And the third thing is, where do we start? Again, if you want to use the technology, you need a huge investment universe. We're in the fund industry, in the asset management industry, and we need capitalization, and we need a broad investment universe, and both is not given. But the space is interesting, it's evolving, but it's not yet at the point where we can say, from an industry perspective, we're about to invest in this.
So just if I might, what you're saying is that there might be a future in this, but that so far the regulation is not ahead, and that it's a bit too early stage.
Regulation is one, the other is the investment universe, liquidity, market cap, everything you need to build portfolios, everything you need to have a scalable business.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe one very, very last question, the gentleman there in the middle center.
Thanks so much. I want to come back to Alessandro's argument regarding there's no alternative for some real estate. And, you know, if you come from a financial perspective and getting out of it with, you know, a return on investment, I would agree in certain cases that's difficult. But, you know, what's the alternative? If you change now from gas to gas and oil to oil, you have a fossil fuel lock-in for the next 20, 25 years, and someone's going to take that financial hit. So if this transition risk doesn't materialize now, if we do a renovation, it will materialize for someone else. And if we're lucky, we can dump the real estate like in 10 years from now, then somebody else is going to take the hit. But how do we ensure now that we take the right decisions, that this real estate is also transitioning? Because from an environmental perspective, there's no alternative if we are pledging to 1.5 degrees.
Look, it's a very good comment, maybe two levels on this one. The first one is that it's true that it might be technically possible, but as a fund manager, I'm not willing to take the cost because I will not have my returns, right? In this case, I think as a fund manager, I'm free to decide if I want to keep it on my portfolio or not, and if this is why we're doing this analysis now when we believe that we're trying to get out of such assets, right? Now, my point of it's just not feasible was actually that really there are specific cases that technically you cannot change your heating. So, I mean, now we're getting very technical, but gas is heating the water to 70 degrees, 80 degrees. Heating pump is doing it to 60 degrees. That means that if you want to change the heating pump, you need a heating floor, which in many cases you cannot do because of the height of the apartment. So there are really, especially in residential, cases where technically it's just not possible to switch the heating, right? And that's what I'm saying, that there also the regulator will allow you to keep on having the gas heating, but obviously your value might slightly deteriorate. Again, I don't see brown discounts residential in main cities because they're very well, they're very well positioned, so you will have an additional cash flow burden. But my point on the technicality was that it's really sometimes not, you cannot change it. It's just, you cannot do it, right? It's from a technical point of view. That was my comment. And in this case, is also in buildings that are, how do you call it, in the city center, when they're very old and you cannot make changes, they will also have exceptions, right? But so you will always have assets that will remain on the fossil fuel heating and will be inefficient. That will be the case, right? So my comment was technically in some cases it just will not be feasible to do any changes.
Unfortunately, we need to kind of bring this to a close. So coming back to the initial question of this session, greening real estate portfolios, where do we start? Could I ask the panelists to kind of give a brief statement from their perspective, reflecting on what was discussed, in this last 1.5 hours. And I'll start with Olivier just on the left and then going to the right.
Yes, very briefly, my point is to highlight that clearly financing restructurings might be a very attractive business in terms of return profile. So I insist upon investors to invest more in this strategy.
Where do we start? When we green a real estate portfolio, we need to tackle the problem at the core. And that is, we need regulation at the level of real estate. Everything else, we can regulate the financial industry as much as we want. It remains a sideshow.
To me, it's hard to answer this question. I mean, I think the start will be the regulation, right? So we're going to have some new regulations. There are some commitment, Paris Agreement. Things have to change relatively quickly. Even if for the moment we don't know how the regulation is going to change, at some point it will have to change. We are not going to be happy with what will happen to us, but that's what it is. So I'm afraid at some point, you know, changing the heating system, even if there are technical problems, even if it's very costly, I'm afraid we will have to go that way. But, you know, we never know.
Thank you.
To be honest with you, it's kind of it's difficult to put it in 2 sentences. I think we should start from setting specific targets, and so I think that, let's say, targeting climate neutral by 2050 is not enough, right? You have to set targets year by year and follow up with them. I think this is where you start. Even if you miss some targets, at least you're going to work on it, and I think this is where I see the real estate industry basically reliable to do it, that they set targets and they move ahead, and that the regulators are going to move towards this direction.
Thank you very much. On my part, it's been extremely satisfying to hear the financial industry collectively asking for more regulation. That's good for our business. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you very much for your question and participation. And have a good afternoon.